Today's video is sponsored by Artlist.
Hey guys, Flo from Off to Lens here. I'm a French-Australian filmmaker based in French Alps, and this is my review of the BMPCC 6K Pro. So I've done a few videos already. I've done a hands-on first impression. I've done a comparison to the regular 6K, but what I want to do today is basically talk about my experience shooting with it as my main camera for the past 3 months. As you know, I don't like to rush when I do reviews. I want to take my time to give you my honest opinion. Before I start, don't forget to subscribe to see more videos like this one, and let's get into it. So as you know, the regular 6K has been my main camera for the past 2 years now. I've used it on commercial work, I've used it on documentary, personal, travel. I even took it to Antarctica. But when they announced the 6K Pro, that made a lot of sense for me because of the NDs, the internal NDs, the tiltable screen, the better battery life, which are features that you kind of want in documentary filmmaking. And having the possibility to even add an EVF and a bigger, better battery grip, yeah, that was a no-brainer for me. If you don't know this camera, essentially it's the same as a regular 6K, so it has a Super 35 6K sensor. You can shoot RAW and ProRes internally. You have 13 stops of dynamic range, you have dual ISO 400 and 3200, and you can shoot a bunch of different resolutions and codecs. So really great, especially for the price, because the Pro is $2,500 US. So the most surprising thing for me since I've had the Pro is I've actually used the camera as is, like no real accessories or anything like that. I just love the way it is out of the box. I didn't think it would be the case because I always used to rig up my 6K with a monitor and cables and better batteries and that kind of stuff, and the Pro just works as is perfectly. So obviously with the pandemic, I've shot a lot less documentary and commercial work. I've shot a lot of licensing content, outdoor and personal. I've used the camera outside a lot to test the screen, to test the ND, especially at first. One of my first projects shot on the 6K Pro was Elevation, which is a visual poem. So we kind of drive up the mountains at 4 a.m. just to capture the sunrise. This was both personal to test the camera, also for licensing. I've used the 6K Pro as the main camera, and I've used a regular 6K as a time-lapse camera. So that worked out really well. And it's funny, even though it was very cold, I've shot pretty much the whole footage, which happened to be between let's say 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. with just one NPF battery. So it was pretty amazing considering the temperature. I had the V-Lock battery on the 6K because obviously the LP6 battery would have not lasted as long, especially with the screen on the whole time. The screen was very easy to look at, even though it was basically facing the sun directly. Being able to tilt it was very handy as well. I remember on the 6K I had to kind of kneel to actually see properly. It wasn't bright enough, then I had to mount my small HD monitor on top of the regular 6K, which with the 6K Pro I had no issues whatsoever. The fact that I didn't need a monitor or an external battery also made it very easy to move around. So basically we were on top of the mountains and we had two sides. So one side was the actual side where you can see the sunrise rising, and the other side was where the light was hitting the mountains behind us. So having just a camera like that, I could just have it on the strap and go back and forth between the two spots, which is a bit harder to do if you've got an external monitor, an external battery, if you've got cables kind of everywhere. And since I recently became a dad, I've actually used the 6K Pro as a documentary camera to document my son's first days or couple of weeks. And it's been really great because I can kind of just pick up the camera and just start shooting, even if it's for 20 seconds. As the battery is better, the screen is very usable. I just put my Zeiss Prime on it and shoot around the house. I don't need to worry about anything. I don't need to mount a monitor if I need to shoot a top angle or low angle shot. And it's been really great. Also, I wanted to thank you guys for all the messages, whether it's on YouTube community post or personal messages on Instagram. I'm trying to get through all of them, but yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been a very exciting couple of weeks. I compare capturing footage of my son similar to doing a short documentary project, which is I capture what's happening in front of me, and I can obviously adjust the angle or the lens, but I use natural light, and the camera is really good for that because I never have to worry about anything. If it's too bright, I put the NDs on. I don't need to worry too much about the actual rig, which is great, which is what you want in a documentary situation. And I think that's the main difference for me between the 6K and the 6K Pro in terms of using it, because the 6K Pro is ready to go. You don't need to worry about anything. You know, when you're on shoot, sometimes you kind of rush and you put a filter or you put a cable somewhere else and you kind of lose it, or you bring the wrong filter. There's no such thing with the 6K Pro. You don't have to worry about any of it, which is kind of like a big relief to have this like whole package ready to go. The only thing that I'm using at the moment, like constantly, is the small rig cage, which is good. It's not great. For some reason, I like the 6K cage or the 4K cage a lot better. I think it's because the bottom has the bit where, I can show you here, this bit underneath here, which is where you can actually hold, don't know if you can see, where you can hold the T5, the SSD. It's kind of like thin and flimsy, so when you put it flat, it kind of just doesn't work as much. Like it's kind of wiggles a little bit, so I'm not super keen about it. Like even now, like just putting it down, as you can see, it doesn't stay, which is kind of like a problem for me, because I like to use the cage as a security thing as well. You know, you put it on the table when you're on a shoot, you put it on the floor, you want it to be stable, and when you put the top handle, it actually tilts forward. And when you do have a lens, obviously the camera is not moving as much, but it still rests on the edge where the T5 should be, and it's just a bit too thin in my opinion. So yeah, it's not perfect. It's great for the price, but it's definitely not perfect. Like I mentioned before, I do a lot of video licensing as well, so the 6K Pro is as good as the 6K in terms of codecs, because I need to send ProRes files, so being able to shoot internally, this is great. It's always been really good. The difference is the Gen 5 is actually better for licensing in a way that it's a more neutral, better file, which is easier to grade, especially if you don't grade your own work or if you need to send it to somewhere else. Like, so for me, for licensing, the 6K Pro is definitely the better camera. So obviously, you know that I like the image and the camera in general, because it's essentially the same as the regular 6K. What I really like is, because I shoot handheld most of the time, I'm a documentary filmmaker, outdoor content is basically what I capture the most of. So having a camera that does it all in a small package is extremely important for me. To me, the advantages of the 6K Pro is all the features that it has on top of the 6K, obviously. Having internal NDs, a brighter tiltable screen, and better battery life. These are features that, as a documentary filmmaker, or pretty much any filmmaker of course, but as a documentary filmmaker, they are very, very important, and they are, for me, enough to upgrade from the 6K to the 6K Pro. Another big advantage that I love about this camera is, as I was mentioning before as well, the fact that out of the box you get pretty much everything that you need. It means that you don't need to take anything else with you if you really want to shoot like an actual project. You don't need to rig it up that much, and that saves you time, money as well. And it's just a much better shooting experience, less stressful as well, if, like I mentioned before, if you do forget something. I'm not a big fan of having like cables everywhere around the camera, and the fact that you can also add an EVF is great. I don't use it all the time, but the fact that you can have one, like if you shoot in super bright conditions, or if you want to be like in your zone, you know, like sometimes I like to actually be looking through an EVF. That's something that I've missed on the other cameras. And pretty much all newer cameras these days. It's actually quite handy, especially for the size. I just have it here, so yeah, like it's super small. It's quite expensive, but to have it as an option with the Pro is very welcomed. And the fact that you can add a larger grip, which equals to like nearly 3 hours of footage, is pretty amazing. I have it just here. It's pretty great, pretty light. But I actually don't use it as much as I thought I would, just because those MPF batteries, even just one, gets you nearly 1 hour of footage. So I have like about 3 or 4, so they're just easier to carry and swap. So that's what I use, but obviously I would use the grip if I would take it on an actual proper documentary project, or even as backup for some reason if the Vlog runs out of battery, if all the other ones run out of battery, or that's something that I would do. Or if I know that I don't have access to PowerPoint, I would actually just use it. And the last thing that I really like is how comfortable the camera is. There is like a good grip to it. Like I don't have the largest hand in the world, but there's something just compared to the regular 6K that is a bit more comfortable in a way that all my fingers actually fit on the camera. It feels very, very sturdy, very comfortable. I'm quite stable when I shoot handheld, just because I'm used to it. But this camera is definitely the best that I've used in terms of handheld shooting. I don't know if it's the screen and the ratios or anything like that, but The cage doesn't really change any of that, just adds a bit of weight. But yeah, it's very, very comfortable to hold. Even though it doesn't look like it, it's extremely comfortable and not as heavy as it looks. So now let's talk about the things that I don't like about the 6K Pro. There's actually not a lot that I don't like. The camera is pretty perfect, I would say, especially for the price. But there's one major thing, and I've talked about it on the channel before, is the Gen 5 versus Gen 4. So having shot with Blackmagic cameras for 7 years now, you know, I've owned and still own the original BMPCC. I've owned the Ursa Mini Pro, the BMPCC 4K, 6K, now the Pro. So I consider myself to be pretty used to Blackmagic color science or the cameras in general. And the Gen 5 is definitely harder to grade, not in a way that the files are not good. I think they're actually better. The colors are more neutral, more accurate. It's just harder to put your own touch. And I've talked about this on the channel, and I've had a lot of people reaching out saying that they were experiencing the same thing. So obviously I'm not the only one finding this change a bit drastic. But obviously I've got the other side of people that, especially on the Blackmagic forums, that basically told me, you don't know how to grade, you don't know how to use a camera, they're essentially the same. They're not. I'm not going to go into too much details. Gen 4 is very different than Gen 5. Doesn't matter how you look at it, it's not the same color science. That being said, it is a better file, it is a bit more controlled, especially in the reds and the greens. So yes, it is a better file, but for me, I like to put my own touch and my own grading. I do my own work. It's just a bit harder. So what I've done is I've actually decided to shoot all content raw. So normally for footage licensing as a documentary filmmaker, ProRes is usually the go-to codec, ProRes 10-bit UHD, that's what I shoot at. But with the Pro, I shoot in RAW 6K, and then I import the files in DaVinci and revert back from Gen 5 to Gen 4 and export the files as UHD ProRes 422, which is great. It's just an extra step, obviously, but that fixes the issue for me, and it's great. For monitoring, because there's also a difference in monitoring 6K, the regular 6K and the 6K Pro, my eyes are so used to the 6K that I feel like I can't expose as much as I would with the 6K. So what I've done is I've just exported a basic LUT Gen 5 to Gen 4, and that's what I use with my small HD or in the actual 6K Pro on the screen, and it works perfectly. But yes, I think I should mention it because some people might be used to the 4K or the 6K and upgrading to the 6K Pro and realizing that it's just not the exact same color science, and it can be an issue, but there's definitely workarounds. And for me, I think the main issue, because I was shooting ProRes, I was kind of limited and everything had to be baked in. But shooting RAW, that kind of solves the problem, gives more flexibility, so it's great. The form factor. So I know I've said that the camera is very comfortable, even more so than the 6K or the 4K. But the form factor can also be an issue because of its size. So it's quite, as you can see behind, it's quite tall and wide, especially compared to the regular 6K, which means that it can be harder to fit in your bag or to carry around. It's just a bit of extra room that you need. It's a little bit heavier. So yeah, that's something that I should mention as well, because it's not something that I don't like. It's more like, if I had the choice, obviously I would prefer the body of the actual normal 6K compared to the 6K Pro. I think ideally a BMPCC 4K Pro would be the perfect travel and personal content camera. So maybe we'll see this coming. I don't know, just let me know in the comments if you think that would be a great addition to the Blackmagic line, or if you've got any other ideas of what would be the actual perfect cameras based on the other manufacturers and based on what Blackmagic is offering today. So one more thing is the EVFs. Obviously this is an extra, you don't get it, you don't have to get it, but I think I should mention it. Whilst I like it, it's also part of the things that I'm not a huge fan of. I like the size, I like the quality of the image, but obviously it's expensive, it's a bit dark, and also the sensor can be a bit annoying. Most of the time when I've used it, whether it was my hand or my head, anything like that, even the top handle would actually turn it off, would turn the screen off, which is a bit annoying. And it's just a little bit dark, I think, to be used constantly. So that's something that I'm not a huge fan of. I would recommend it, obviously, if you need an EVF. I think it's much better than maybe paying for $2,000 or $3,000 for professional one. This is very small, fits in a bag, and it doesn't add that much weight. But yeah, it's something that I'm not entirely sure, but I don't use it as much as I thought I would. So yeah. So now a quick word about today's sponsor, Artlist. So I've talked about it on the channel before, but basically Artlist is a website where you can get music and SFX for your projects. As always, I wouldn't tell you guys to use something if I didn't use it for myself. I've used it on documentaries, on commercial work, and on his channel for the past 3 years, pretty much every week. Not having to worry about the music that you've licensed is very, very important. As an example, like in the past, before Artlist, I was working on projects and sometimes it would cost up to like $2,000 to be able to use a song for a commercial or festivals or anything like that. So extremely handy, extremely important, and great value. So don't forget to use the link in the description if you want to get an extra 2 months on your subscription. I think what we have to remember is that this camera is $2,500. And for that price, apart from the amazing image quality and the 6K sensor, you get internal NDs, a 5-inch 1500 nit tiltable screen, NPF batteries internally. You can shoot RAW and ProRes with like so many different resolutions and frame rates. So I think for that price, you can't really go wrong with it. Of course, if you need autofocus, if you need in-body like stabilization, this is not the camera for you to start with. The extra battery life compared to the 6K has been a very welcome addition. And I think the battery in combination with the tiltable screen has been the reason why I haven't used the 6K, the regular 6K as much. Even though I love that camera, the 6K Pro just makes it so much easier to just pick up the camera and start shooting. If you do documentary work, the camera has pretty much everything that you need, having internal NDs, having the screen, having the possibility to add an EVF or the grip for extra battery life that gets you nearly 3 hours. That saves you from having to bring like cables and chargers and filters and that kind of thing. And if you do like travel content or personal content, it's also like a great camera because, like I was saying before, you don't need to bring anything else. Just have the camera sometimes on a strap. That's it, just a cage to protect it. You can add the mic just on a cage. It's still a very kind of compact setup for all the features that you get. People always ask me, like, do you miss autofocus? Do you miss in-body stabilization? Stabilization, not so much. I shoot handheld a lot and I'm used to it. I don't really feel like I need it. Autofocus would be great. I'm not gonna lie, like it would be amazing if you could import like Canon's autofocus into the Blackmagic cameras, but I think that's also why Blackmagic cameras are affordable. Is they're good at what they do, which is the image and the specs and the usability and the features that you get. And maybe we'll see autofocus in the future. I hope so. But yeah, for now I don't miss it. I would like it, but I don't miss it. I think that's it for me for today, guys. I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know in the comments if you need to know anything else. I'm also keen to hear your thoughts on the camera, whether you just upgraded to it or you just got it as a first camera. And don't forget to use the link in the description to get an extra 2 months when you subscribe to Artlist. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.